Hello everybody and welcome. Today we're going to delve into the depths of chapter Menachot Daf 84b, a journey through the laws of meal offering and advanced spiritual lessons. It's a two intellectual feast touching upon the fundamental principles that echo throughout the entire Torah. The key points and summary of Menachot 84b. On Daf 84b, the Gemara continues the discussion about the Omer offering and Shtei Lechem, the two loaves, two unique meal offerings. The central question is whether these offerings, which are brought from newly ripened grains, must come specifically from grain grown in the land of Israel. The main debate on this daf revolves around a fascinating braita, which is an external Tanaic teaching that quotes Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Yehuda. He holds a surprising opinion. The Omer and Shtei Lechem can be bought from grain outgrown outside of Eretz Yisrael. This contradicts the general understanding of the verses which link these offerings to the people's entry into the land of Israel. The Gemara then grapples with how to reconcile Rabbi Yossi's view with the verse that states, "When you come into the land," Leviticus 23:10. The conclusion is that the verse, in his opinion, isn't limiting the geographic origin of the grain, but rather teaching a different lesson. That the Jewish people are not obligated to bring these offerings until they enter the land of Israel. The connection then broadens, connecting this idea to the laws of the Bikurim, the first fruits, which are also tied to the land of Israel. The Gemara clarified that when the Bikurim may only be brought from the seven species of Israel, the initial law of their produce applies. So he said again, the initial law of their offering applies to all types of produce. So let's dive straight in. So I'm just going to continue the last paragraph of the previous daf. We learned in the Mishnah elsewhere in Bikurim 1:3, one may bring first fruits only from the seven species with which Eretz Yisrael is praised in the verse, a land of wheat and barley, vines, figs and pomegranates, and a land of oil and honey, Deuteronomy 8:8. But one may not bring them from dates that grow in the mountains. So what does that mean? Below morim shebaharim v'chulu. Dates that grew in the mountains or produce that grew in the valleys may not be bought as the first fruit offerings. One may bring dates that grew in the valley and produce that grew in the mountains, as they continue to be of optimal quality. Even if one brings inferior quality produce as first fruits, such as mountain dates, valley produce, or dusty or smoked grapes, we do not attain the consecrated stage of first fruit. This is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Sefer Zerayim, Bikurim 2:3. And one may not bring them from produce that grows in the valleys. V'lo mipeiros sheba'amakim. Rashi in Pesachim 53a explains that such produce is of inferior quality due to the fact that the water in the valley is stagnant, thereby causing the produce to wilt and rot. It should be noted that this halacha applies only to the grains of the seven species and not to the fruits. Such produce is of inferior quality and may not be used. Others says even if one did bring such produce, he does not thereby consecrate it, i.e. does not attain the consecrated stage of first fruits. Rabbi sat in the study hall and stated this halacha. Rabbi Abba raised an objection to Rabbi from a braita. The Torah refers to the two loaves as an first offering to the Lord in Leviticus 2:11, which indicates that it is to be the first of all the meal offerings. Meal offerings of any type may not be bought from the new crop until after the two loaves have been offered. If one did so, the meal offering is valid, and that's from the Rambam, Sefer Hilchot Yisurim Mizbeach 5:10. It comes from the new crop. And similarly, the verse states with regard to the festival of Shavuot, and on the day of the first fruits, when you bring a new meal offering to the Lord, in Numbers 28:26, by designating the two loaves as new, the verse indicates that they should be bought from the first of the new crop. I have derived that only that it must be new, i.e. the first of all the wheat meal offerings. From where do I derive that it must also be new, i.e. the first of all the barley meal offerings? The only other meal offering that is made from barley is the one brought by a woman suspected by her husband of having been unfaithful, a sota. The Gemara in Sota 14a explains that since she is suspected of engaging in base activities, a characteristic of animals, the meal offering is bought from barley, which is mainly used for animal fodder. The Gemara here raises the possibility that it would be permitted for a sota to bring her meal offering from barley of the new crop, even before the two loaves have been offered. you're doing the meal offering of a sow. So with regard to the two loaves, the verse states the word new, and again states the word new, once in Numbers 28:26, and again in Leviticus 23:16. If the second mention is not needed to teach the matter of being a new meal offering of wheat, applied to the matter of being a new meal offering of barley, the Bible continues. And from where is it derived that the two loaves precede the bringing of the first fruits as well? The verse states, and you shall make for yourself a festival of Shavuot, the first fruits of your wheat harvest, in Exodus 34:22. The order of the verse teaches that the offering of the festival, which is the two loaves of offering, precedes the bringing of the first fruits of the wheat harvest. I derived only that the two loaves precede the first fruits of the wheat harvest. From where do I derive that they also precede the bringing of the first fruits of the barley harvest? The verse states with regard to the festival of Shavuot and the festival of your harvest, the first fruits of your labor, which you sow in the field, Exodus 23:16. The order of the verse teaches that the offering of the festival, which is the two loaves offering, precedes all formal first fruits that are sown in the field, which includes barley. From this verse I derived only that the two loaves precede the first fruit that sprouted from the seeds you sowed, as the verse states, which you will sow. From where do I derive that they precede even the bringing of the first fruits that sprouted by themselves? The continuation of that verse states in the field, Exodus 23:16. The term is superfluous and serves to include even produce that sprouted by itself. The Bible continues. From this verse I derived only that the two loaves precede the bringing of produce that grew in a field. From where do I derive that I include even produce that grew on a roof, or that grew in a ruin, or that grew in a flower pot? Atzitz. It would appear that the term atzitz refers to the very basic earthenware pot that had not been fully fired in a kiln. Such pots were used to hold items and for storage in cases where there was no concern for fine craftsmanship or durability. They were used to hold plants, as a tub for waste, or as a chamber pot. Occasionally, an atzis was even made simply from the bottom of a broken pitcher, or that grew on a ship. The verse states, with regard to the priestly gift, the first fruit of all that grows in the land, which they shall bring to the Lord, shall be yours. Numbers 18:13. The term first fruits in this verse is referring to all types of fruit, first fruits. This teaches that when the two loaves are referred to as the first fruits, the intention is that it should be brought first before all other types of produce. The Bible concludes, from where is it derived that the offering of the two loaves is to precede both the bringing of libations from the grapes of the new crop and the bringing of the first fruits of the tree. It is stated here with regard to the two loaves, the first fruits of your labors, Exodus 23:16. It was stated there at the end of that verse, when you gather in the products of your labors from the field, just as there the term your labors is referring to both the fruits used for the libation and the fruit of the tree. So to here the term is referring to both fruits used for libations and the fruit of the tree. Rabbi Abba explains how the Braita poses a challenge to Una's ruling. In any event, it was taught in this Braita that bringing the two loaves must precede even bringing of produce that grew on a roof. So was a footnote. Some suggest that the difficulty posed by the Braita to Una's ruling is from all four cases. The Braita validates the use of inferior produce, whereas Una disqualified it, sees Rashi. Other commentators suggest that the difficulty relates specifically to the fact that the Braita validates the use of produce that grew in a flower pot or on a ship. Such produce is particularly inferior, and yet the Braita rules that it can be used. If so, how can Una disqualify mountain dates and valley produce with certainly better quality than produce that grew in a flower pot or on a ship? By contrast, produce that grew on a rooftop or in a ruin is of superior quality to mountain dates or valley produce. So the fact that the Braita validates the use is not difficult at all. That's in the Rashi manuscript that grew in the ruin, that grew in a flower pot, that grew on a ship. This indicates that all these types of produce are valid to be bought as first fruits, despite the fact they are of inferior quality. This would appear to contradict what is ruling that dates that grew in the mountains and produce grown in the valleys are not fit to be bought as first fruits. Rabbi explains, whereas in the first clause, where it discusses which types of produce can be used for the first fruits, in the last clause we come to discuss which grains can be used for meal offerings. The Gemara explains that whereas inferior produce grown in atypical locations can be used for meal offerings, only superior quality produce grown in normal occasions can be used for the first fruit. This is derived from the word from in the term from your land. The latter comes to explain the reason for this distinction. The first fruits are unique in that the bringing of them is a demonstration of the beauty of Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, there is a particular emphasis on ensuring the fruit is of good quality. By contrast, meat offerings do not represent Eretz Yisrael. This is evidenced by the fact that one may use produce grown outside of Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, as long as produce is not entirely inferior, it may be used, and that's from Tahorot HaKodesh. Produce that grew in these atypical locations is allowed to be bought as meat offerings, but not as first fruits. The latter clause of the Bryce explained that the verse, the first fruit of all that grows in the land, in Numbers 18:13, is referring to produce that grows in atypical locations. Rabbi defended his opinion by explaining that the verse concerns meal offerings only. Rabbi Ada bar Ahava objects to this. If so, that which is written in the latter part of the verse, any pure member of your household may eat of it. It's difficult as the phrase your household includes a priest's wife and daughters and teachers, that they may also partake of the priestly gifts referred to in the verse. But if the verse is referring to meal offerings, that's problematic, as they are permitted to be eaten only by male priests. In resolution of this difficulty, Rav Moshiach said, perforce this verse should be read as if two verses are written, as otherwise it contains an inherent contradiction. The first clause states, the first fruit shall be yours, Numbers 18:13, indicating that only a priest himself may partake of the priestly gifts. As is written in the continuation of the verse, any poor member of your household may eat of it, indicating that even female family members may partake of it. How do we tend to be reconciled? Here the latter part of the verse concerns the first fruits, which even female family members may eat, and there the first part of the verse concerns meal offerings, which may be eaten only by male priests. Rav Ashi said that there is an alternative resolution. The verse in its entirety concerns meal offerings, but with the latter clause of the verse we come to the specific case of the loaves of a thanks offering, which even female members of the priest may eat. The Gemara notes Ura and Rav Aha bar Abba disagree with regard to the issue. There is still a dispute of the earlier Amoraim. Rabbi Yochanan says, even if one did bring mountain dates or valley produce as first fruits, he does not thereby consecrate them, i.e. they do not attain the sanctified status of first fruits. Reish Lakish says if one did bring them, he has consecrated them. They are regarded like a gaunt animal with regard to sacrificial animals. Although it is improper to consecrate such animals or such produce as an offering, if one does, the consecration certainly takes effect. The Gemara discusses the dispute. Granted, the opinion of Reish Lakish is well founded, as he stated the reason for his ruling. But as for Rabbi Yochanan, what was the reason for his ruling? Rabbi Elazar said, I have an explanation of Rabbi Yochanan's ruling, and since I was privileged to see Rabbi Yochanan in a dream, I know that I am saying a proper matter. The verse states with regard to first fruits, and you shall take from the first of all the fruits, Deuteronomy 26:2. The addition of the word from indicates that one should take from some of the first fruits, but not from all of the first fruits. It teaches that one should use only the 7 species for the mitzvah. The verse continues that you shall bring from your land. The addition of the word from indicates that one should take the first fruits from some areas of the land, but not from all areas in your land. It teaches that one should not take dates from the mountains or produce from the valleys. The Gemara asks, and as for Reish Lakish, for what halacha does he use this term your land? He holds that the term is necessary, but that which is taught in the Bible. Rabbi Gamliel, son of Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, says, but we land is stated here, Deuteronomy 26:2, with regard to the first fruits, and land is stated there with regard to the praise of Eretz Yisrael. And a land of wheat and barley, vines, figs, pomegranates, land of olive oil and honey, Deuteronomy 8:8, which are the 7 species. It serves as the basis for a verbal analogy and teaches that just as there, the verse is referring only to the produce that is the praise of Eretz Yisrael, so to here, with regard to the mitzvah to bring the first fruits, the verse is referring only to produce that is the praise of Eretz Yisrael, i.e. 7 species. The Gemara asks, and the other one, Rabbi Yochanan, since he has already expounded the term from your land, to teach that one may not use mountain dates or valley produce, from where does he derive that only the 7 species may be used? Rabbi Yochanan holds that since the Torah could have written your land, but instead writes from your land, the word land can be used to form the verb analogy, while the word from can teach or may not use mountain dates or valley produce. And the other one, Reish Lakish, what does he derive from the fact that the Torah has the word from? He does not learn anything from the fact that the Torah could have just written your land, but instead writes from your land. In Hebrew, the term from your land is expressed by a single word, ma'azeka. Reish Lakish holds that the Rebbe used the entire word. It is taught in one brayso with regard to produce that grew on a roof, or that grew in a ruin, or that grew in a flower pot, or that grew on a ship. The owner brings it to the temple and recites the accompanying passage of thanks to God. See Deuteronomy 26, 1-11. And it is taught in another brayso with regard to such fruits. The owner brings them but does not recite the accompanying passage. The Gemara attempts to reconcile the brayso. Granted, according to Reish Lakish, both braysos accord with his opinion that even inferior produce can be brought as first fruits, and they contradict each other only with regard to whether or not one should recite the accompanying passage. And even with regard to that, the fact that the ruling of one brayso about produce that grew on the roof is contradicted by the ruling of another brayso that about produce that grew on the roof is not difficult. One can explain that this brayso, which states the passage recited, referring to a roof of a cave, Gad Dim Ara. The rabbinic sources often refer to three different types of cavities: a pit, a ditch, and a cave. A pit is a narrow, round cavity in the ground. A ditch is also narrow, but it is long. A cave, by contrast, is usually quite wide. One of the other unique distinctions of a cave is that it has a roof, whereas a pit and a ditch do not. This roof would often be formed by a large rock resting upon the cave walls. In some cases, the rock would cover the top of the cave entirely, and in other cases, some of the roof would break away, leaving an opening. Often, earth would collect upon these rocks, and it would then be possible to plant crops there, which is considered part of the ground, whereas that brayso, which states that the passage is not recited, is referring to the roof of a house. The commentators discuss the reason for the distinction between the two cases. Some explain that the roof of a cave is considered part of the ground, whereas the roof of a house is not. It's a Rashi manuscript. There is an apparent difficulty with this explanation. If the roof of a house is not considered part of the ground, then why should first fruits be bought from there at all? One possible resolution of this difficulty is to claim that the obligation to bring them is only by rabbinic law, and this is the reason that although one should bring them, one does not recite the accompanying passage. Some commentators reject this explanation, claiming that there is no obligation by Torah to bring such produce. Then by Torah, its consecration as first fruits will not take effect. Therefore, it would not be permitted to bring into the temple, and it is prohibited to bring non-sacred items into the temple court. And that's when the Tivus HaKodesh. Other commentators explain that the roof of a house is always considered part of the ground. Accordingly, produce that grows that may be bought as first fruits. Nevertheless, since such produce is of inferior quality, even if one brings it, it is considered inappropriate to recite the accompanying passage of thanks, says the Rosh. Similarly, the fact that the ruling of one brayso about produce that grew in a ruin is contradicted by the ruling of another brayso about produce that grew in a ruin is not difficult. One can explain that here the brayso states that the passage is recited is referring to a cultivated ruin, whereas there the brayso that states the passage is not recited referring to an uncultivated ruin. And the fact that the ruling of one brayso about produce that grew in a flower pot is contradicted by the ruling of another brayso about produce that grew in a flower pot is not difficult. One can explain that here the brayso that states the passage that is recited is referring to a perforated flower pot, when the produce is able to draw nourishment from the soil beneath it, whereas there the brayso that states that the passage is not recited is referring to an unperforated flower pot. Produce that grows in a perforated flower pot is considered to have received its nourishment from the soil beneath it and is fully subject to the mitzvah to bring the first fruits. By contrast, produce grown in an unperforated flower pot is not considered to have grown in the ground, reason there is no obligation by Torah law to separate two more ties for such produce, and similarly is not subject to the mitzvah of bringing first fruits. The obligation to bring such fruit is merely by rabbinic law, and it is for that reason that the accompanying passage is not recited as a response of the Rashba. And the fact that the ruling of one brayso about fruit that grew on a ship is contradicted by the ruling of another brayso about fruit that grew on a ship is not difficult. One can explain that here the brayso that states that the passage is recited is referring to a ship made of wood, whereas where the fruit were able to draw nourishment through the wood from the ground, whereas there the brayso that states that the passage is not recited is referring to a ship made of earthenware. So what does that mean? Kan bisfina shel eitz, kan bisfina shel cheves. The other commentators offer varying interpretation of the Gemara's distinction. The Rashi explains that plants in a ship made of earthenware are considered to be nourished from the ground. It would appear that this because the earthenware itself is made of materials from the ground. This is not to a plant in a wooden ship. The wood is not considered to be like the ground, and they cannot receive nourishment from the ground through the wood, so they cannot be used for the mitzvah. Tosfot cited in Rabbeinu Tam explains the distinction in the opposite way. It is only produce that grows in a wood chip that can be used for the mitzvah because the porous wood allows nourishment from the ground to pass through it, unlike earthenware. It is unlikely that there were ships made from actual earthenware, as the material, despite being water resistant, is quite fragile, and so it would be impractical to build a ship from it. Some suggest the Gemara refers to small ancillary ships made of earthenware, used to assist in the construction of large ships. It is also possible that the Gemara refers to rafts made of wooden woven shoots, whose interiors were covered with a layer of clay and mortar similar to earthenware. In conclusion, so what is the ultimate takeaway of this daf? The final consensus as presented by the sages is that both the Omer Shlei Lechem must indeed be from the grain of Eretz Yisrael, from a Yoshi's lone voice. Though ultimately it is not accepted, halacha provides crucial insight into the nuanced and multifaceted nature of our holy text. It seems to teach us that even when a verse seems to state an obvious geographical limitation, there may be a deep and profound temporal or historical lesson embedded in it. This is a testament to the incredible wisdom and depth of our tradition, where even a minority opinion can illumine a new path of understanding. May you continue to learn and be inspired, and I wish you all the best. Bye.